You're listening to As I Was Saying. I'm April Simpkins, and each episode we unpack what's quietly messing with your mental health at work and how to take your peace back without quitting everything. This podcast is for you if just pushing through is wrecking your peace. I'm breaking down the stuff we all deal with and giving you tools to actually do something about it. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to As I Was Saying, the place where we talk about work, people, leaders, mental health, and all the other things we want to say out loud at work, but end up whispering in the corner cubicle. I'm April Simpkins, and today I'm talking specifically to leaders. This episode is for any leader who's found themselves down a team member and you're looking at the rest of your people saying, can you just pick up the slack for now? And you meant it, knowing full well that everybody's at capacity and there's no actual plan. Because here's the truth. That painfully ambiguous time commitment called "for now" might be one of the most abused phrases in the workplace. Now, sometimes it really does mean temporary teamwork during a transition. But what I've seen time and time again is "for now" is often a staffing gap with no timeline. You know, I addressed this very topic in my recent Dear April advice column when a reader shared that one of the employees on her team was fired. And the reader now had to take on a chunk of the fired employee's work. And the reader wanted to know how to set boundaries without coming across as not being a team player. And this person was willing to help. And I see that. But too often, help becomes an expectation, and then the expectation becomes pressure, and then pressure turns into resentment. You know, when the employee who's been tasked with shouldering more work asks a reasonable question that's focused on setting boundaries, many times that employee gets framed as not flexible, not committed, or not being a team player. And those labels, those missteps by leadership, that's where leaders tend to lose people. Once I was working retail as an assistant manager, and the district manager came to the store one day and fired the store manager and like 3/4 of the staff over some questionable sales transactions. And I became the quasi store manager with assistant manager pay and unbearable hours. And the loss in staff resulted in poor sales, increased customer theft, and me completely overworked, understaffed, untrained, and very, very frustrated. So take my story and the reader's question in Dear April, the advice column, and let's talk about some leadership missteps and how to fix them. Let me tee this up for you. Someone quits or they get fired, they go on leave, they disappear in the witness protection program, whatever. Their work still exists. Customers still need things. Reports still need to be run. Somebody has to cover it until we find a replacement or the replacement gets brought up to speed. And the problem is not the temporary redistribution of work. Businesses do that all the time, every day. The problem is when leadership treats temporary coverage like it's an informal favor rather than an actual management decision. You can't just throw extra work over the fence and onto someone's desk and then still evaluate that employee like nothing changed. That was the problem I had at the retail store when 3/4 of the staff was gone and I was the last man standing. So before you ask an employee to absorb extra duties, and I don't care if the extra duty is grabbing the mail or finishing up a project for your number one client, you as a manager should already know these critical 5 things. 1, what that employee is covering. 2, what can come off of their plate. 3, how long is this going to last? 4, what support or training that employee is going to get. And 5, whether their compensation is going to be impacted if the redistribution of the work lasts longer than we anticipated. And if you don't know the answer to those questions before work distribution begins, then you're not delegating, you're improvising. And improv is cute and all when it's jazz. It's much less cute in management. So let's start by tackling compliance, because this is where a lot of leaders get casual, and then casual gets very, very expensive. Now, under the Fair Labor Standards Act, or FLSA, most non-exempt employees must be paid for all hours worked and receive overtime for hours over 40 in a work week. Also, exempt status, and some may refer to this as salary, is based on actual job duties, not titles. So if someone's work changes in a meaningful way, you want to pause and review the changes against the backdrop of labor compliance instead of assuming everything is still fine. Now, that doesn't mean that every temporary assignment becomes a legal crisis. It means leaders should realize extra work isn't managed by free labor. You definitely want to create a policy and some kind of standard operating procedure around the redistribution of work. Don't just wing it. So let's talk policy, not dusty handbook language nobody's read since orientation. I mean, useful policy standards that touch on a usable process for temporary assignments. The policy should address things like time spent cross-training, interim coverage for the employee who might have to go through training, and at what point the shift in duties and responsibilities might trigger a compensation review. It's expected that from time to time, as a leader, you need employees to take on additional work because, I don't know, an employee has left, they've separated, they've resigned, been fired, but you don't get to call it pitching in and ignore that there might be a change in compensation along with the change in hours and workload. I'll sometimes hear managers say things like, it's only temporary, or it really won't take that long. And my all-time favorite, we all have to wear a lot of hats around here. And let me tell you, if one person is wearing like 6 hats, you don't have a team player problem. You have a staffing problem. And, in addition to compliance, there's the culture side of reassigning duties. Gallup, that does all kinds of polling, identified unmanageable workload as one of the top drivers of burnout. So when employees ask what they're taking on, what should be deprioritized, how long the change will last, or whether they'll be trained, that's not resistance. That's maturity. not only is that employee monitoring themselves for burnout, they're trying to protect the quality of the work and manage expectations and avoid feeling like they're being set up to fail. Too many leaders hear questions and then interpret that as attitude. But clarity is attitude. It's planning. Also, employee concerns about workload and working conditions should never be viewed as an emotional reaction. As a matter of fact, the World Health Organization says that poor work conditions, which includes excessive workloads and low job control, are risks to our mental health. It can trigger depression and anxiety. And the World Health Organization also estimates that depression and anxiety lead to 12 billion lost working days globally each year, costing about $1 trillion in lost productivity. So if work is being reassigned because we're down a team member, there should be clarity around what's shifting, why it's shifting, who approves it, what support is being provided, when we're going to sit and talk about it. Getting granular with this is not red tape and bureaucracy. That's clarity and leadership. And let me say this also to the leaders who are genuinely trying. Sometimes there is no perfect option. Sometimes you're just short-staffed. The budget's tight. You need people to help hold things together for a minute. I totally get that. But employees, they can usually handle a hard truth much better than a vague one. You can say something like, hey guys, for the next 30 days, I need help covering these 3 tasks while we work on a longer term plan. Or you can say, I don't want this to feel like a silent rewrite of your job. So let's talk about what shifts while you're covering this. You can always say something like, if this continues past the review date, we'll revisit workload and compensation. That's what leadership sounds like. And please, by all means, do not forget or sleep on the training part. In the managing of day-to-day business, there are many times that someone fills in for another employee or maybe helps a coworker get through a busy period. That happens, but there's a huge difference between helping and supporting a coworker with a project and owning the job. If someone's taking on work they've never owned before, support isn't optional. It's required. Sometimes the most critical part of owning a task is knowing how to troubleshoot problems. Otherwise, those problems will become a crisis. That's why a handoff, documentation, shadowing, clear standards, and somebody available for questions is imperative when tasks are reassigned. When there's no training, what employees hear is, I need you to be responsible for the result, but I'm not willing to invest in your success. And that's how trust erodes. So if you're listening and realizing as a leader, you may have reassigned the work of a departed employee without a clear plan, here's the fix. Clearly name the work assignment. That's first. Put it in writing. Explain the trade-offs. In other words, I need you to take this on and we can pause on that project, or we can move these other tasks to someone else. Because the reality of this challenge is that each person only has so much capacity. So help them decide what gets shifted and what gets deprioritized. Also, set a review date. None of this "we'll circle back" jargon, but a real date when you hold a real meeting so you can talk through the status of the work, and always thank the employee for holding things together during this time of transition. A little bit of appreciation goes a long way. And that's it. That's the work. Now, before I close, let me say this. I know that Some organizations, some departments naturally run lean. I get it. On the one hand, it seems very efficient until you're down a person, which makes reassigning tasks very different. There's a difference between running lean and being under-resourced. Also, don't tell your team they need to be flexible when the problem is you haven't taken the time to create structure and you've left things largely undefined. And lastly, don't call something temporary when you know full well the change is really permanent. Because if people are constantly covering for missing roles with no end date or clarity, that's not agility. That's a recipe for burnout. Okay, I'm going to sum this episode up with 3 takeaways. First, any kind of temporary coverage needs structure. If the assignment affects workload, it needs to be defined, supported, and reviewed. Second, added duties that require more time can create compliance issues. So watch those hours, the overtime, your pay practices, and whether the actual work still matches the role. And third, employees who ask for clarity are not being difficult. They're actually giving leadership a chance to lead well. Honestly, most employees don't mind helping. They mind being quietly volunteered into a new job while everybody pretends it's temporary. I hope you've appreciated this. That's it for today. Thank you so much for spending time with me. And if this resonates, share it with somebody who needs to hear it. And as always, like, comment, and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. This is April Simpkins on As I Was Saying. Take care of yourself, take care of each other, and be well.